Everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric series, The Port Authority, where I take a look at some of my favorite arcade games of all time and weigh them against their most common home console ports. And if you can't tell already, today we're playing The House of the Dead, both on the Sega Model 2 as well as the Sega Saturn. And when I say this is the most disappointing port I've ever seen from Model 2 to Sega Saturn, I 100% mean it. The House of the Dead on the Saturn is basically a completely different game. Sure, the gameplay is intact, but the overall vibes, the graphics, and everything else is just a massive downgrade compared to the Model 2 original. And considering we saw such good ports like Sega Rally from Model 2 to the Saturn, you know they could have done better than this. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined to want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But The House of the Dead, I will always maintain, is one of the best arcade light gun games ever made. Sega 100% nailed the formula right out of the gate, and we've been playing this franchise ever since. The overall colorways, the vibe, the graphics here just scream Model 2 and Sega development, and it looks absolutely incredible. So when this game was announced for Sega Saturn back in the day, I as a kid was absolutely excited to be able to buy it because I played this so much in the arcades. I want to just be able to play it at home, but little did I know that Sega had actually farmed the port out to another company, Tantalus Interactive, and what they delivered on the Sega Saturn is nothing short of an absolute travesty considering what we know the Saturn can handle as far as 3D is concerned, because this is the Sega Saturn version of The House of the Dead, and you will immediately see it absolutely looks like some of the worst 3D graphics you'll see on the Saturn. The models are absolutely chunky and pixelated. Everything in the background is even heavier pixelated, and that ground right there looks like it's made out of maybe 100 pixels in total. Secondarily, the frame rate absolutely takes a downgrade from the Model 2 original. Now, we know that the Sega Saturn could never keep up with the Model 2, but in games like Sega Rally, where you see intelligent ports designed around the hardware constraints, you have an incredible version of a game that just doesn't have Model 2 graphics. But here in the House of the Dead on Sega Saturn, it's even worse of a story, because if you can't tell already, the colorways and overall vibe of the game completely shift between the Model 2 original and Saturn. Here we have almost this sunset golden hour cloudy sky with rain coming down. We have all these bronzes and these gold colors in the sky, as well as that house in the background, Dr. Curian's mansion, or the House of the Dead obviously, and you can see that warm glow on it, and it just looks so good. If we go through the same area on the Sega Saturn, suddenly that sky has turned to an overcast day, and the house in the background doesn't have that glow to it, giving it that ominous vibe that you know whatever is inside is not going to be good because you already experienced the horrifying monstrosities that are outside of the house. This, I think, is the #1 offense of something like the Sega Saturn port of The House of the Dead. Tonally, it completely changes the game versus what you see here on the Model 2 original, which is such a colorful game. Sure, it is drab, but all of the colors really do punch on the screen when you get inside and get to some of those crimson reds in some of the architecture and draperies. It just looks so good, and that really is the bummer part about the House of the Dead port. It just kills the vibes entirely, and before you ask about the PC version of the game, it is inferior to the Model 2 original, and trying to get it to run on a modern system is an exercise in futility. I spent about an hour trying to get that thing to run on my PC and gave up, and because it isn't as good as the Model 2 original and Model 2 emulation is so buttoned up, I really didn't even feel like trying to spend any more time dealing with it, because the Sega Saturn port back in the day was the one that everyone was waiting for and coveting to be able to play one of Sega's best arcade games at home, and what we got just was not what we expected. Again, everyone knew that the Sega Saturn couldn't do Model 2 graphics, but it could do a hell of a lot better than you see here. And again, as we shift back to the Model 2 version, pay attention to the overall vibes and the color here. You have these rust colors on the brick wall, you have this nice vibrant green on the actual whatever sludge that is on the ground, and the actual roof of the building, you have this nice kind of cast glow light to it. It all sets a tone and it sets a mood, and it feels very dramatic and horror-like. You want this subdued lighting when you're playing a horror game, and again, the Sega Saturn couldn't 100% keep up with the lighting models, but as we move back over to the Sega Saturn version of the game, you'll see it's completely different. It's almost imperceptible that what that surface texture in the bottom is water. The roof is completely different tone now, and it really doesn't feel like a horror game whatsoever, and that just is such a massive letdown. The one saving grace of these ports, though, is the music is the same, so go ahead and listen to the sound sample. Model 2 first and Sega Saturn second. I'll be right back with a lot more. While the soundtrack is the same, you can definitely hear that the Sega Saturn version has an inferior sound quality. It seems like it's been encoded at a lower bit rate. As we watch the introductory cut sequence here side by side again, you can just see the fundamental difference. It is night and day, and a lot of it just comes down to the shading and the color. You'll see here on the Model 2 on the left, you get shadows, you get this dramatic look to the game, and on the right, everything is just so even. It doesn't have that horror aesthetic anymore. It really just lacks that completely. And again, some of the models look fine. They're not as high quality as Model 2, but that would be forgivable. But really here, as you see the characters roll out into different areas, the lighting model is completely different, and that just 100% takes the entire horror effect away. On the Model 2, there's definitely going to be more geometry and more details in the environment than you're ever going to see on the Saturn. And that, again, is just a bummer because this game came out in 1998, and we had seen plenty of games using full 3D on the Saturn that looked incredible. Stuff like Burning Rangers, Sega Rally. We knew that the Sega Saturn could handle 3D and get very close, if not to par, with what the PlayStation 1 could do when under the right development hands. But something like the Saturn port just was not made either correctly, or it wasn't made with the proper amount of time, because if you go back to the Model 2 version again, you can just see the night and day difference, and pun very much intended there, because I can't stress enough just how different this game feels with the different lighting model and the different shading. One feels like a horror game where you're fighting your way through Dr. Curion's mansion, trying to shoot down hordes of zombies in front of you, and the other game feels like a brightly lit imitation version of the Model 2 original. And even though this game still retains its fun factor, that is about it. And you can seriously tell in the footage here, the frame rate on the Sega Saturn absolutely struggles, which makes it slightly harder to play as well. The Sega Model 2 original had a very nice smooth frame rate, and the Sega Saturn version just chugs along the entire way. It really is hard to find any redeeming value as far as the Sega Saturn port of this game is concerned, which is such a letdown, and that's really what happened on the Saturn era of hardware. You just had very hit or miss ports from the Model 2 original. Something like Daytona USA was not great whatsoever, but Virtua Fighter 2 was absolutely outstanding. Something like the House of the Dead loses all of its charm and fun and fear factor from the arcade version, but then you have games like Sega Rally, which translate the Model 2 original gameplay over and work so well on the Saturn, so we know that the Saturn hardware could keep up. So the House of the Dead definitely could have been a lot better than what you see here. And even back in the day when I was so excited to get this game, I had a lot of fun with it, but I knew immediately I wanted to pop back to the arcade and play the arcade version just to see the differences, because that was my preferred version of the game. And this is a great example of what I mean when I say the color shift just completely changes the tone. This is the fight against Chariot here in the first boss level of the game. Take a look at the ceiling, take a look at the wall. It's so evenly lit. It doesn't really have many horror vibes whatsoever. But you move over to the Model 2 original, you have better textures, a completely different look, and a completely different shading. But one more soundtrack sample, because again I want to compare the music in the two, so go ahead and listen first to the Sega Saturn version of the game, and then to the Model 2 original, and you tell me which one you think sounds better, because honestly, you can tell pretty much quickly. But enjoy! Same great track, but it sounds better coming out of the Model 2, and that really is the story of the House of the Dead. If you want the best performing version with the best frame rate, you want the Model 2 original. If you want the version with the most atmosphere and the best graphics and color and shading, you want the Model 2 version. If you want the version of the game that has the best sounding soundtrack, you want the Model 2 version of the game. There really is nothing that the Sega Saturn version does that the arcade version doesn't that I could possibly recommend above, and that really is a bummer, because this game could have been so much better on Sega Saturn, but it qualifies in my opinion as the worst Sega Model 2 to Sega Saturn port we ever got. But you leave me a comment down below and you let me know what you think, and I'll see you guys for another Port Authority soon. Bye bye.